Welcome back, GRD132, Typography 1, to part 2 of our lesson on tracking and kerning, making this Moravian College logo just out of text, just out of a Garamond font. And what I'm going to do next is we're going to make a logo and change the font. So I'm just going to move down a little bit, just scroll down, and I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to hold down my Alt key or my Option key and just make a copy of it. And I'm going to change the font. And I'm going to use something I saw earlier called Crete, which is a nice slab serif font. So I'm going to choose Crete Round. That's a nice little bit of a bolder kind of font here, and that would be something nice to use for a collegiate type logo. You could certainly try something heavier, but that looks nice now. It's not a whole lot different than that. And I don't want to do anything with it. And notice the kerning did hold up here. It didn't change. Let me double click on here to see that that didn't get adjusted at all, and that's the same there. Now it may change from font to font, so you have to be careful to check it again, and I think that looks okay. So everything looks nice and tight here, and I'm going to keep it at 60 pixels right now, even though the guide is outside here a little bit. And I'm going to make a partner font here, kind of a supporting font. Instead of them being so equal, I think I'm going to put it in a different font. So I'm going to take College here and copy that just so I don't have to retype it. And I'm holding down my Alt key, and you could always duplicate it. Now, I wouldn't use something like this because this is a slab serif font and this is a serif font. Not that you can't use different categories. Matter of fact, you should use different categories, but they're too similar. The slabs and the serifs you wouldn't typically want to mix. Usually if you had some kind of slab or a regular serif, you want to mix them with a sans serif. So they're different. These are too similar. You put them together and they just don't work together. So I'm going to make this into a sans serif font, and I'm just going to use something from my list here called Roboto because there's a lot of different weights in it. So I'm going to use Roboto, and I'm going to use condensed because it has a nice kind of narrow look to it, so it looks a little bit different than this. Now, if I'm using this here, and remember I have auto scale font on, and if I try to make it bigger, you know, the same width, they kind of compete. They don't really, nothing really stands out anymore because this is real big now. And again, we have that issue with College really standing out. Why put them in two different fonts if one of them isn't standing out? Now, if I went and made it smaller, this is 60. Let's say I went and made this like 36. I'll double click here. This is 69, so I'm going to make this 36. Okay. And whenever that box is way bigger than the text, you can go over here and put on auto and auto on both sides to kind of snap the box to the text. Now, if I did something like this, I could do that, except it looks kind of off balance. This Moravian on top kind of overpowers it. It looks like it doesn't have enough of a base on it. Like you could kind of tip over on either side, even with this tracking. I mean, if I took away this tracking, if I put it back to 0, I mean, it would really make it off balance. You know, it would just be, it would have these awkward spaces on either side. They wouldn't really go at all. This overpowers that. So one thing we do sometimes is use tracking, just like we did up here, but it's going to be a little more pronounced down here, is we're going to really spread out the tracking to make it be nice and light, also to keep alignment on either side, but to really lighten it up and also to balance it off. So let's try to do that. Let's select this, and I'm going to go to spacing again, which is our tracking. And I'll start off with 0.2. And that looks okay. And I'm going to try to go all the way to the end. So let me try 0.3 and try to line them up. 0.4. And let me move it before I go any wider. And that's starting to look pretty good. I'll just nudge it over with my arrow key. And that's pretty good. I could probably get away with like 0.38 or something. So they're fairly even. And again, let me try 0.39 because it's just slightly off. And that's pretty good. So they're nice and even. I like the stroke of the N lining up with the E. I like this lining up kind of centering on the C. The C goes out a little bit to the end of the serif. And that looks pretty good. And I'm using Roboto, and I actually might want to go lighter because there's still not a big contrast between them. So I could go light here. Now there's the light font. Now there's nice contrast between them. That actually looks nice. And I can move this up here. And that has kind of a nice look to it. It has a nice bold, light kind of look to it. And it's just a different way of using the tracking to spread it out. What the tracking does is it makes it lighter. Here we use the tracking to make it lighter, but also just to kind of even it off on either side. The tracking doesn't have a big influence on the whole look of the text altogether. Matter of fact, you might not even notice it, but here you really notice it. It takes this font and really makes it lighter. And sometimes you can use bolder fonts. You might say, well, let me go back and use the regular here. So I'm going to go back. Maybe that's too light. And I'll use regular. That doesn't look bad. And what you could do is even track it out more. Like maybe I'll go to like 0.5. Now that's getting real wide, but then maybe I'll make it smaller. So let me try 30, and again, I'm just doing guesswork here. There's 24, and I like it at 24. I think that has a nice size difference, except maybe I'll just take this down to like 0.49 just to even it off. Okay, and that looks pretty good. So that looks good, and sometimes you'll see things in a block and the text will be reversed out of it, but I'm going to leave it like that right now. And one thing I just wanted to point out, just a subtle kind of thing here, that if you ever wanted to use a line in here, like use a dividing line, sometimes a rule or a line will act as not a separator, but actually kind of join it. And I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to go up here, and this is where you usually have your rectangle and ellipse and things like that. I'm going to use the line tool and just kind of draw a line across and try to keep it straight as possible. You can always hold your shift key when you do that, but I think it'll kind of auto align for you and stay straight if you stay on a straight line. And I'm not going to go too far. I'm going to go to the end of the end, the serif on the end, and just put a line there. Now, right now, that's too close to the college at the bottom, and I can move college down. And what this rule will do sometimes is act like a kind of a unifier, not just a divider. Now, one thing you want to do, instead of just throwing any size line here, I like to match it up with as thick as this font that's here. So this Roboto regular that I have here, I want to make this rule a little bit thicker. So it's 1 pixel right now. I'm going to make it 2. And that should make it close to like the strokes of this letter. So that makes it kind of consistent in a way. And I could even spread this out a little. I'm just going to nudge this down a little bit and nudge this down. And what actually happens is they kind of work together. It forms like a little shelf underneath. And instead of acting like an underline under the word Moravian, this acts like kind of a shelf that Moravian sits on. It becomes a little platform for it, and it actually kind of works. So you can see what I mean by saying the line acts like a unifier. It's not dividing it, it's actually unifying it a little bit. It makes them work together as an element. Now, let me just show you one little thing. If I went here and I made this thicker, and I put it up to like 4 pixels, and that's closer to the thickness of this text, you can see what it does. It becomes more of an underline under Moravian. It seems like you're underlining the word Moravian, and then you have college. So it doesn't unify as much. It seems to balance off better when you click on this and keep it basically the thickness of the letters at the bottom. Now, this big heavy font up at the top balances off because college now has a line with it. This line is now kind of partnered with college to serve as kind of the base that the Moravian lettering sits on, if you can kind of see that. So it works a little bit better. I'll even turn off the guides so you can see this stuff without the guides, but now it kind of works better. So what you have with these kind of 2 logos here, and they're just kind of made up logos, these aren't real, not that Moravian College isn't real, and they did have something like this in the past, but what happens now is you now have a logo where this thing kind of stands out a little bit. This is kind of secondary, and you don't have all these thin lines like you would have in a serif font. This would hold up better at smaller sizes. Even these letters, these sans serif letters, would hold up better at smaller sizes. If I zoom out, you can see it's nice and readable even at small sizes, and that line acts like a nice kind of unifier. It gives it a look to them. So that's just another element that I just want to show here when you're designing, and when you're designing with typography, that tracking can be used as a design element. Now, in the next video, I want to show you that you don't just want to use tracking for any reason at all. You're using it for a specific reason. Here we're making it lighter so we could make it smaller. Because if it's all together, it's a short word, it doesn't fit well underneath. So we're making it both lighter and we're spreading it out without stretching the actual characters. But in the next video, I'm going to go over how not to use tracking, how not to spread things out, how you should use it for headlines to tighten things up a little bit, and how you should not use it to just spread things out just because you feel like it. So that'll be in part 3 of our kerning tracking series of videos.